o'clock. Let's call this work session to order. I'm not in charge today, so I will hand it over to Lindsay.
Great. Hi, I've introduced myself to each of you. I'm Lindsay Hill. I'm with Hill 2 Consulting. The other part of the 2 is my wife and business partner. We're nonprofit consultants. I've got a little intro here. Hold on, let me get there. Oh, there it is. Okay, so married 30 years, nonprofit consulting, and also working with other organizations, over 40 organizations in the past 7 years, including EOBA and rural development initiatives. And I've also done some work in Gilliam County with PCDC and public meeting facilitation. I'm really happy to be invited to be here today. Hopefully you have no questions so far. So the goals of the day are really pretty narrow, and that is to set one-year goals for the court, actions the court can take in the next 9 months to 1 year in service to key goals for the county. And this is what the court has asked me to undertake and facilitate. And also looking forward to using our discussion today. There aren't going to be final decisions today, and we'll talk about that a little bit further. But our discussion today can also be utilized to build the foundation for a more full strategic plan in the future. So those are the 2 goals of the day. And here's our agenda. Now, we may not go this long. It really just depends, but you can see right away there's a lot to talk about. And I'll tell you a little more about how we arrived at this structure, but we're currently in the introduction process here, 1 to 115, and then we're going to talk about housing, technology, and infrastructure, and we're going to allow about 20 minutes each for those. We're going to have questions and comments. So at each juncture between these major sections, which I'll talk about what those sections represent, we're going to have questions and comments. So anyone here is free to ask questions, make comments, and we encourage you to do that. 225 to 255, business development and healthcare, questions and comments, and we're going to take a break. Then we'll spend some time on tourism, education, and community image, questions and comments, and then court staffing, county services, and granting, and then questions and comments, and then wrap up and next steps. How am I doing so far?
Very good.
Okay.
I'm still with you.
All right, good. Hang in there. So the way this works is we've identified key strategic categories and big picture goals for those, and we utilized to some degree the prior, now expired strategic plan for the county just to get some categories set out. As I did interview Leslie, Sherry, and Liz, and I listened closely and realized that there were 4 roles that the court might want to play relative to these categories, thinking about the next 9 months to a year. Not necessarily permanent roles, but just looking at this particular short-term time frame. In some cases, the court would lead by proposing initiatives. In other cases, the court might partner with existing entities that were working on these issues. In another capacity, the court might support. And in another capacity, the court might want to initiate some research in the next 9 months to determine what future action might be appropriate. So those 4 roles are what defined the 4 major categories after which we'll have questions and answers, and I'll speak a little further to that in just a minute. So what we're going to do is identify some goals for the court in each category. So what does the court hope to see happen in that particular area of interest in the next 9 months to a year? And then from the interviews and the other input and the previous strategic plan and other research that we did, there are some various action steps that could be taken up. So we're going to go over those. Hopefully we'll be able to gain some consensus around actions the court will take, and identify who would actually lead those actions, so there's some accountability and some probability that something will actually come out of this, which is, you know, that's wonderful when you have a meeting and something actually happens afterwards. So the other thing that's up there is, for each of the categories and for the things that have been proposed, we're going to differentiate the strategic from the more immediate, because 9 months to a year is pretty immediate. And some of the things that came up and were proposed or were ideas that were brainstormed in the interview process look like they might be more suitable to the greater strategic plan later than to what's the court going to do in the next 9 months. But that's for the court to reason out with your input. So let's see, final thing. It's not a decision-making session. I will produce with Sandy's assistance. Has offered to take some notes. Since I'm going to be up here wandering around and ranting and pointing at the slideshow, he'll take some notes around actions that the court proposes to take, and I will be submitting to the court a summary of those fairly soon after the meeting. Wow. Okay, that's a lot of words. Is it? Leslie, are you still with me here?
Still with you.
Jerry, Liz, everybody all right?
Yep.
Any questions from the gallery here? Okay. Next up. I'm going quickly because I've got the feeling that people don't necessarily want to take forever. So I'm going to put a high priority on staying on task and finishing on time. There's going to be opportunities for questions after each of the segments. So I'm asking everyone in the room to think carefully about the point you want to make and keep your comments as brief as possible. And give me permission to be a little rude if I have to be and sort of say, okay, I need to cut you off, or I'd like to redirect you back to the topic at hand, and hopefully nobody will be too offended. I live up in Spokane, so I'll just get in my car and head out of here if I get anybody too upset with me. Any questions about the process? Still doing okay over here? All right. So this is the challenge. We've got 11 categories that we want to cover in basically, a couple hours, 2-3 hours, 4 hours, whatever that turns out to be. You've got housing, technology, and infrastructure at the top, business development, healthcare, recreation, tourism, education, community image, court staffing, county services, and the granny programs. So there is a lot to go over, and we're going to manage that process by, once again, peeling out what's strategic and focusing on what the court wants to spend its time on in the next 9 months to a year. In the interviews and research, as I mentioned, sometimes the court said, we need to be really proactive about this. And that means we might initiate some new actions ourselves. In some cases, there's already stuff going on. And the court indicated they just wanted to proactively join with others in pursuing the goals. In some cases, they said, look, that's really somebody else's main responsibility, but we want to be responsive and we want to be supportive when we're asked. And then there were some areas where the court explicitly said, we really need to look into this and figure out what to do. So, lo and behold, housing, technology, and communication, I'm sorry that slide turned out a little weird, and infrastructure were areas where the court felt they might need to lead, meaning initiate some action. That doesn't mean not partner with folks who are already working in that area, but it means be really proactive. Secondly, with partnering, business development and healthcare emerged from the interviews as areas where the court felt they might best reach out and partner. In the support category, recreation and tourism, education and community image were seen as areas, all of these 11 are important. We're not talking about what's important. They're all important. These are areas where organizations or entities may already be underway addressing these, and the court felt For the next 9 months to a year, they might best be in the support role. With court staffing, county services, and the granting programs, there was more of a sense that I got, and I may not have gotten this exactly right, that the court felt we need to do some additional research, put together some documentation, whatever that might entail, and plan our future action. Any questions about this? So we'll go over the top ones first, the lead. We'll go through the partner, the support, and then the research. And after each one of those segments, there'll be opportunities for comments and questions. Okay, let me see where I am here. Okay, you're going to be relieved to know that we are 5 minutes early.
Good job.
All right.
Keep gaining 5 minutes.
What's that?
Keep gaining those 5 minutes.
Yeah, we're going to keep going with these 5-minute gains here.
Yeah.
All right. So here's areas where the court may take the lead. Housing, technology, communication, and infrastructure. Now one thing, I'm going to go back for a second. Maybe I'll eat up our 5 minutes here, sorry. But one of the things that emerged from our conversations, and they were individual conversations, not shared, is that housing, technology, and infrastructure form the foundation for business development. And they also form the foundation for attracting and retaining better and more extensive healthcare resources. So these top three were seen as foundational, and everybody was talking about these. So then as you move through, I just want to remark that the top three were building blocks upon which the others could be added. And that's why on the agenda, these received more time. And as we go through the categories receive somewhat less time. Okay, so housing, technology, and communication, and infrastructure. Let's talk about housing for a second. This is basically the goal from the previous strategic plan. It's the large-scale goal. Generate the county's growth and long-term viability by developing housing for our residents, our workforce, and people moving to the county. Some of that was added, and hopefully no one is tempted to do wordsmithing today. That's just the spirit of it. So the question that I would ask is, what progress does the court hope to see 9 months to 1 year from now on this issue? And the role, at least assumed at this point, is that the court is going to take something of a leadership role in this very critical issue. So some of the candidates from the brainstorm that we did, each of us, support the City of Condon's Fairway Drive development, develop local construction workforce, research a resolution on building codes functions, the McCog and state situation with an eye toward encouraging development. So I think that had to do with regaining some control over the code's functions. Continue to partner with PCDC to review and revamp housing development incentive programs and explore private-public partnerships to jumpstart housing construction. So the question I have is, for the court, which of these seem to be, would fit into something you might want to take the lead on or put some action in place in the next 9 months to a year?
For me, I think the one that stands out that is definitely something we're going to have to address is the building codes issue. That is one that, Wasco County, if they're moving forward, would be prepared to take us on by the beginning of the next fiscal year, so July 1. So I think we need to have a plan about whether we want to join or look at other options if we can't come to a resolution with Wasco County on the terms.
I did see Scott Hagee yesterday at my North Central Public Health District meeting, and he said he is anxious to come talk to the counties involved and say what they're considering doing.
So what do you propose you might be able to do in the next 9 months to a year to move this forward?
I mean, I think we're going to need to have some conversations with Wasco County about the terms that they're offering, and see if we can come to a resolution. There's been a lot of back and forth on the reserves, but honestly, I think that may not be the best use of our time, because what I'm seeing so far is that the data just isn't there to know exactly whose money is in there. So it would be a best guess, because building codes, the state does not have records for the vast majority of McCog, and the ones that they do happen to be the time when Wasco County was really developing the most out of the 4 counties. So, but somehow the members of McCog, to kind of wrap up McCog, need to decide how they're going to divvy that up. And I don't know that there's going to be an easy solution. So it's kind of a two-part thing, is that, because Sherry's our McCog person while they're wrapping up. So part of that, I think, is getting the member counties to make a decision on what they're going to do with the reserves. And that will either help us in our negotiations with Wasco County or cause us to not have as much leverage as we might like to have. So for me, the first step is kind of getting the 4 counties to make a decision on the reserves. And then simultaneously having a discussion with Wasco County about what a partnership would look like if they were to take us in. And depending on what they say, if it's not something that we think is going to work for us, then it would be looking at if there's another county out there, potentially maybe Morrow County, that would be a better partner, a better fit. So I kind of see it as 3 sort of steps, but the negotiating power comes from the reserves. So I think we need to figure out what the decision is going to be on those. Because the other piece of that is, I think Wasco County has also been counting on the reserves all going toward a partnership. And I don't know if their calculations change dramatically if, say, we split it 4 ways and 2 of the counties went elsewhere. I don't know if they can still make that work.
So is there anything else in this list that you would see some urgency for the court to lead on, or partner, or other category in the next 9 months to a year? Or are there any things you want to add to this list?
I think the list looks pretty good. I'm focusing right now on, I mean, the one that's drawing my attention is the 5th one. And I don't know how that.
Exploring private-public partnership.
I don't know how that looks, but.
But don't we do that in conjunction with PCDC? I mean, 4 and 5 to me go kind of hand in hand because they're working with private.
I guess I'm just wondering if we can do more.
I think
Or if we should do more.
Well, I think we just need to continue to give PCDC as much support as we possibly can to further their program. That's a support as opposed to a lead.
We talked when I had my interview. You know, I one of the things I hear a lot from people at the north end of the county is, you know, the problem with the trailer park. So that's why I was hoping somehow through this process we could maybe start to make some steps towards some kind of, I just lost my train of thought, but yeah.
So that might be something to add, even to break it out so it's a little bit more clear that there's a specific objective, which is trying to address the lower trailer park in Arlington. And it seems like, because this has actually come up this week, because PCDC was wondering about the 25,000 that was previously set aside for it, and it kind of doesn't appear to have really gained much traction on their end for a variety of reasons. And so Nathan and I had a conversation this week about, do we need to relook at that, restart it, figure out, because there's some, I mean, the county has some ability potentially to take ownership of some of those for various reasons.
Is that the money that was set aside for what the DA was going to work on?
Yeah.
So, just one quick note, the trailer park, Shane Drive, is listed under community image on the agenda.
Okay.
Oh.
So.
So I'm thinking it might be actually better
In housing?
fit under housing.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. So why don't, yeah, so if that's the case, let's add it to housing and let's address it now, as you're already doing.
I mean, in terms of action steps for it, I mean, I'm kind of feeling as if there needs to be a team, because there's so many pieces of this, right? There's the potential that certain houses may be condemned. There's, you know, folks are behind on, say, property taxes. There's potential for, or personal taxes, there's potential for the county to seize some of those. There's the larger sort of human question about, you know, if folks don't have a place to live there, where do they go? You know, so to me, it seems like there's several people from different, that would come at this problem from different areas that maybe need to be talking about what steps we could be taking to try to address it. What do you think about that? Sort of, I'm kind of thinking like our action step would be a leadership role in terms of bringing together different resources that might be able to come at this from different angles, and seeing, you know, both from the property side, the tax side, and also the human side of, you know, how do we support folks in either finding better housing or finding, you know, if we can't provide the services that are needed to support somebody, how do we help transition them maybe into a place that's going to be a better, more supportive place for them to live. Because we don't have a lot of low-income housing options that somebody could just move into, or, you know, in terms of the social net is not as strong. You have to get to Hermiston or the Dallas a lot of times to access some of those services. So.
Well, good. I'm glad we're moving that to housing.
Okay.
Great. And so, do you want to put it as a priority to form this work group?
I think, I mean, from my vantage point, I think that's got to be the starting point.
And who would lead the formation of that work group?
I mean, they're both looking at me. It's kind of my job, so I'm happy to step forward and do that. Yeah.
So far we have work on resolving the McCog building codes issue with the reserves with Wasco and the other two counties. And it looks like Sherry is the representative of the
Are
board.
you already the alternate?
From a cog? No,
Because you took Mike's.
I got
so
Mike's
I think I'm the alternate on
I
that.
think so too.
And you're the point.
Okay.
And address the trailer park. And those are the two current immediates. And then Leslie mentioned perhaps taking an additional initiative to support PCDC or stepping up the court's efforts in that area. Anything more, Leslie, to say or suggest, or anyone else to say or suggest about what that might actually look like, or how?
Yeah,
that
see,
might
that's
look like?
that's where I struggle a little bit, is
Yeah.
what that looks like. You know, the problem with like, just for example, waste management, and, you know, having all those employees, you know, and they're hiring all the time, and no place within our county for them to live is, you know, the amount of people that come in from outside Gilliam County is just gets higher and higher. And like we've talked before too about the housing, you know, if we could get something going with the housing, the other things will follow.
Grow from there.
I mean, for me, I think it might be helpful for us to even hear from PCDC on, as they're talking to contractors, homeowners, landowners potentially, what is causing people to not take it up? You know, sort of what are they surfacing as, well, I would do this, but, because the thing is it's, the money's there, right? And we've made the investment, which is, you know, at least from our perspective,
Yeah.
that was kind of what we brought to the table. And so then the question is, how come folks out there are not just snapping this up and kind of identifying what that doing?
When can we, I guess, interrupt at any time?
Anytime.
A lot of the problem is the building inspection. Not having a building inspector, not having him on a constant, you know, they're gonna be here twice a week, once a week, every week. It makes it almost impossible for builders to compete.
Okay.
Why would they even wanna come here to where you work so much and then you gotta leave, go do something else, wait for a building inspection, come back the next week, go so much, have to wait for another building inspection. It's hard. So they get multiple projects going, so nothing gets done in a timely manner. I think your building inspection problem is one of the biggest ones.
Okay.
Because you submit your plans, they go to Salem for plan review, then back to whoever's gonna be your building inspector for let him make his adjustments. There's such a backlog of time before you ever get anything done.
So
You know,
maybe
I remember,
money is better spent trying to get the building codes issue solved.
I would think that should be your main priority. Once you get building codes done, so that it's easier for people to build projects, you know, even if it's just a remodel.
Can I add on to Dewey's?
Yes,
Yeah.
Because I totally agree, because we had a project that got put out 6 to 8 weeks because it was an inside job. I mean, no, that sounds like. It was an interior job.
There you go.
And it had to go to Salem because they couldn't do it. But going with Wasco County, I have reservations because it seems like every partnership the county has with Wasco County, it starts out great guns good, North Central Public Health, Norcor, and all of a sudden Wasco County's broke and they need more money from this county. So I just urge caution. I agree, we need to get the building codes figured out and the inspections are the most important. But I caution going with Wasco County.
And I would also caution that Morrow County, with the growth that's happening there, their building inspector, he sometimes does inspections over the phone.
Well, Wasco County's the same. There's a new 20 home
Yeah.
project
And
getting
so
started there, and
that's-
they're building all those homes out by the river, and.
Yeah.
they're
And that's
just-
an everyday
their housing
project
is-
for an
yeah.
inspector, every day.
Yeah,
So
because there's
when
so
do the
many.
rural areas get inspected?
I do know with our contractor
Maybe
that's
last
from
one
Morrow
was-
County, he said the inspectors over in Morrow County are a lot better to work
Right.
with.
But they're maxed out themselves.
I agree, with the port and everything else.
So,
what other, I mean, if it's not Wasco County or Morrow County, what other alternatives do we
Hire our own
have?
building inspector.
I mean, I don't know that we have the volume to handle
No, we
that, to be
don't.
honest. So part of it too, I mean, there's still a legislative effort to look at counties being able to contract out for that. And so maybe part of this research kind of resolution is just touching base with Betsy Johnson, because I think she was
Well,
the
that-
lead on that.
Salem's the biggest problem. Salem implements all these rules and regulations, but then they have no way of policing them.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you do want to do a project, you have to send your stuff to Salem, who isn't staffed enough to do their job.
Yeah, but what they're
So-
looking at is, so there's a legal question right now about whether counties can contract out for certain services, and one of those services is building codes. 'Cause I think the previous court had looked at that possibility of maybe contracting with previous inspectors who may be going out on their own and setting up their own shop, but they ran into a potential constitutional problem with that I think Betsy Johnson was trying to kind of iron out and make clear that we actually could contract, because we already contract, for instance, with like community counseling solutions for certain things. And so I think there was an impetus to try to get that sorted. So if that was the case, then potentially the counties could look at going out and contracting directly with a private inspector. So there's kind of I think it's still worthwhile to open a discussion. So for me, the first step is knowing what those reserves are, because that will help us negotiate for a better deal with either of the counties, with either Morrow or Wasco County. So that, for me, that's got to be resolved. Then I think it's appropriate to ask both of the counties and see what, maybe part of the IGA is that we have dedicated days and guarantee that we'll have inspectors in the county a certain amount of days a month, so that the contractors have at least a little bit more, they can rely on a schedule, so that we're not just constantly getting bumped by the Port of Morrow or by whatever's happening in the Dalles. And then if neither of those look like good options, then I think we hope that the legislature fixes
Allows us to.
the problem, and then we would need to pretty quickly find a suitable contractor that was willing to go into business and just do a direct contract with them.
Because it seems like to me that there would be a lot of other small counties that would be looking at that too. And, maybe there are some that are close around us. We are surrounded by a couple of big ones that have a lot going on, but there's a lot of little ones too that maybe are more similar to Saline County.
Yeah.
So it seems that we have some consensus around some key actions that need to take place. And, one of the things that is pretty clear is, that there's a limited amount that anyone can take on, and these seem to be the most highly leveraged based on the input here and based on the comments of the court and the interviews and so forth. Looking at the McCog situation and figuring out the reserves and getting it worked out with Wasco and the other counties, and seeing if you can legislatively subcontract this out, and really having the court be aggressive in pursuing those resolutions, and subsequently getting some building inspector lined up who can be responsive to projects. And then maybe it would be appropriate, or the court would then, or the county would then be in a better position to interface with PCDC, Condon, Arlington, other partners to promote projects. I'm not here to make solutions, but that does seem like a logical succession of things to do.
Well, and it seems if we can remove this building codes barrier, then if there are additional barriers, maybe those will be sort of uncovered.
Yeah.
Or if people just start building and that was the issue, then we'll kind of know that. But if we're still not seeing people take advantage of those incentive programs, then maybe at that point, we kind of know it's not building codes that's causing the problem.
Great. So,
I feel good with that.
we are 1 minute early. No, we're not anymore. That clock,
That clock's fast.
That clock's
It's
fast.
that clock is making a liar out of me.
We're 1 minute, we're still 1 minute. ahead of
Okay.
schedule.
Technology and communication. So this goal was somewhat reformatted based on conversations, but develop and support quality technology and communications, set and reach the goal of 100% access to affordable, high-speed internet service in Gilliam County. So, you know, under that, so this was once again something that the court seemed to feel that they might want to just take the lead on, be a bit more aggressive and get engaged even further. I know there's been a lot done already and that there's a line being dug even as we speak, so it's not as if nothing's happening, but develop a broadband strategic plan was one idea. Initiate efforts that support community partners working to deploy fiber through the county. And then initiate efforts that support Columbia Basin Electric and other corporate partners in their effort to deliver broadband to county customers. And I think, if I remember correctly, Columbia Basin was more focused in the south of the county, was that right? So anyway, this is an interesting and lofty, I think, goal. I don't know if it's lofty, but 100% access to affordable high-speed internet service. And the thought was that the court might want to really set that as a commitment, or at least tentatively or provisionally set that as a commitment in this conversation. And then there are three, I think, highly interrelated bullet points for potential actions that the court might want to take in initiating work in this direction. So I turn it over to the court to sort this out.
Yeah, so I'll just out myself and say that set and reach the goal of 100% access was just about verbatim of what my feedback was. So, I mean, I kind of felt that it was useful for us to set out there in the universe that this is what our ultimate goal would be, because I'm tired of hearing people say that because you live in rural America, you don't get to have access to this. So I would like to figure out ways that we could make this happen. And obviously it's not going to be one sweeping solution for the entire county, because there's several partners that are working on it simultaneously, but I just felt like it was worth it to even just make the statement that this was our goal as a county, was to have access to it. Not necessarily have fiber to run into every home, but equivalent of what you would get in Portland, I think, is something we should shoot for as a county.
Does the Condon still have a fiber committee?
We do.
They do.
And we have a strategic plan that we're on schedule to update. Hopefully the next month or two.
I mean, one thing that just came to my mind while we were sitting here was, and I did not talk to the city about this, so Catherine may be like, oh my gosh. But what if we thought about taking sort of the framework that the city has started with their strategic plan and with the fiber committee, and thought about doing a countywide fiber committee and strategic plan, and maybe not usurping the cities, maybe there's two separate ones, or we figure out how to mesh that, but have it so it's a more holistic, so we can also stop talking about, well, in the north end they're doing this, and in the south end they're, so so that everyone who's at the table, whether you're working on deploying it in the north end or in the south end, that you're talking to each other and that we're all on the same page that the goal is 100% access.
That's a good idea, because I was just thinking too of, you know what, our strategic plans are going to be so intertwined that a lot of things in our broadband strategic plan actually have to do with outside of the city limits. And so it would make sense to have a strategic plan and maybe have some focus areas in that strategic plan for the city of Condon and
Or the city of Arlington.
City of Arlington, City of Lone Rock,
Yeah.
and rural.
So to me, then, our court actions would be sort of creating that fiber committee, identifying who are the partners who could make this work, and adopting a strategic plan that covers the entire county, with those sort of and have the cities, weighing in if the city, I guess have to have a discussion with the city about, does it make sense to have two separate fiber committees, one that's just focusing on the city and one that's doing the broader thing, or do those eventually morph into one?
I can see us still having, at least for now, a fiber committee, since we do own or have leased dark fiber.
Yeah,
Um,
but the folks on there would be great starting
I would
numbers
hope
for
that
the
you would ask,
countywide.
I would hope that you would ask, because on our fiber committee, we do have a rural resident. I'm rural, actually, even though I work for the city, and you are on our fiber committee, and the other two are counselors in. And so, maybe we can work on this together, because the thing is too, is with our approaching the fiber committee again, is there was a lot of people we reached out to with the last one that didn't participate, such as the schools, healthcare, and some of the other services, businesses. We wanted to make sure we got all of those, and maybe with a countywide one, we can encompass all those, because those are the things that are in the strategic plan.
Mhm. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
I like it.
And then I would see that that committee then could also be looking at ways to kind of help support partners, you know, thinking holistically about those best efforts. So that the providers themselves are at the table, you know, are kind of part of that. I mean, they can be showing up to those meetings and participating and sharing what they're up to. I mean, a lot of the telecom companies don't really like to share what they're up to, but some may want support, so.
Well, we have Columbia Basin and we have Arlington TV Co-op, which are two different entities, but which serve two different communities, but they can still help each other, the way I see, by not maybe joining forces, but at least sharing issues and ideas and problems.
Yeah, and home telephone and
Resolutions
that.
and home telephone as well, yeah.
As well, yeah.
Great, so.
Did we give you enough?
Yeah, so do I understand that Liz and Catherine will be getting together and spearheading the idea of forming a county-wide fiber committee with, while Condon retains its autonomous committee, but there can be interface and work, and that you'll be working to bring in potential corporate partners and others who would be interested in moving this forward.
And I would say, to follow up on that, one of the sort of action items or things that I would expect that committee would produce is a strategic plan for the whole county. That be one of their first tasks that they take on is, the city has a great sort of beginning kind of thing, but then that we could build from that and make sure that it fits for the full county.
Well, and also what needs to be said about that is the council has made clear that they do not want to be in the fiber committee after they get this done. So I think actually if it all works out and we get enough participation, it would be kind of nice to see it all just morph into one once we get the project. If they're serious about not wanting to be in the business but to still have representation on it, I think that is something to look forward to.
Then we get away from that north-south divide a little bit, so.
Anything we can do to do that.
All right, we are rocking and rolling here. We've picked up 12 minutes.
Good job.
All right, so infrastructure. So just to be honest about it, you know, maybe my own shortcomings here, but there were things that were in infrastructure that maybe were more directly related to how housing would end up being done. There were things, as we found out earlier with the trailer park, that might go into community image, but they might better be placed in housing. So some of these categories overlap. But the idea was expansion and enhancement of current infrastructure such as water, wastewater systems, roads, rail, barge, facilities, industrial land development. And within that, this was once again one of these categories that the court felt they might want to be even a bit more proactive than they have been. There was a desire to really get the court's arms around the status of current projects. So there may be a lot of things going on, and there was a sense that the court might like to have some kind of really concise summary of what's actually happening so that the court can find the best places to engage. And the rail line at Shuttler Station was mentioned specifically. There's also, this was, I think, pretty important, and once again kind of feeds back into the housing loop, work with cities to support utilities extensions to empty houses and buildable lots, including the city of Condon's Fairway Drive development. So the sense that I got there was there are buildable lots that don't have water or don't have water sewer. There are potentially houses that have maybe, some of which may be derelict, unoccupied, that you know, the cost of getting sewer hookup can be $20,000 or more, at least in past experience we've had. So, you know, how would that happen? And that might be a way to stimulate housing development, but it lives in the infrastructure category. Advocate for resources to pave the Arlington Airport Strip. Explore and support conversation of dry land, agricultural land, conversion, excuse me, of dry land, agricultural land to irrigated land. Explore options for derelict buildings, especially if county-owned. So are there some of these that look to the court more like strategic level items, and are there some things here that jump out as next 9 months to a year type of priorities?
I mean, to me, a lot of these are longer term projects, probably that would go beyond the scope of 9 months to a year, realistically. I mean, there may be some things, I know the city is starting to work on their Fairway Drive stuff, where there may be, depending on their timing, an opportunity to be a partner, potentially. The advocate for resources for the Arlington Airport Strip is kind of already happening, because I took that with me to the legislature to encourage them to look for funding for that. But that's really kind of the Port of Arlington's, I think,
Yeah, and they're
project.
on their radar.
So that's more of a support or advocate for them than a taking the lead on, I think.
Okay. So what about the utility extensions to empty houses and buildable lots?
You know what, if I could add on that one,
Yes.
that there is, what we really need, and Rachel has started on this, at least in Condon, is a buildable land survey. Right now, we're doing a economic analysis for commercial and industrial lands, but if we could have maps of actually Arlington, Condon, and Lone Rock that have, you know, which lots does have water and sewer, which are buildable if they're not in a floodplain or something like that. That would go a long ways too. And we have a general one that was done probably 10 years ago, but Condon at least needs it updated. And I imagine that kind of information for the city of Arlington will also be extremely valuable to have, to know about the extensions.
And is that something, Catherine, that would just take like staff time, like if it was something that we asked like the community development office to work on, or is that something that
I think
needs somebody outside to take a look at?
I think that what Rachel has started doing, working with the public works in both cities, or all three, I'm not sure how Lone Rock, I think Lone Rock just has water and then they have septic, is mine. But if you had a staff member to work with the public works at both cities, you could get away with that. You don't need any expensive
Okay.
consultants or anything like that.
So that to me is definitely reachable in 9 months to a year. And then that would, because I think we need to kind of identify that before we would have any sort of productive discussion with the cities about, hey, if we help support financially, you know, would this be part of your plan? You know, those kinds of conversations really can't take place without the data underlying it.
And I don't know if the city of Arlington has a master plan for their water and sewer. We have some for extensions, but not very much.
I would guess that that would have been part of our, I mean, those, we had 2 big projects while I was there, and I can't, it just seems like that would have been part of it, but it was a long time ago, so I can't. What about obtaining the current status of the projects as being less than 9, or, you know, maybe a 1-year type
Yeah,
goal?
particularly the rail line.
Mhm.
That's something I don't know that much about yet.
Which part of the rail line?
The extension that they were talking about.
It's completed. They're using
I'm
it.
thinking more about,
Additional,
I'm thinking more about, like, you know, how we had talked about, you know, taking down the elevators and maybe not necessarily purchasing the land from Union Pacific, but getting some lease or something and trying to develop that. That's what I was thinking about a little bit when I saw that.
Because there was talk about putting another connecting switch onto the lines that we built, the dead-end lines, to connect back into the main line
Right.
again. That would make the siding in the industrial park a lot more user-friendly, where they don't have to push cars in. They can actually pull them through, especially with the configurations of the trains now. I think those connecting switches would be a huge investment for the county.
yeah, and so that's something that's been talked about, adding additional sidings out there also has been talked about, putting in some sort of rail car repair facility has been talked about, and there's preliminary plans for all of that that have been done.
Can they offload any rail cars in Arlington?
What's that?
Can they offload rail cars in Arlington?
No.
There's no area for it.
I don't know if they have any space, I don't know.
So in terms of how to go about doing that, is that just, do we just need staff to really kind of give us a synopsis of what previous courts have looked at and talked about? I mean,
I know Jeff Schott has a lot of information about what previous courts have discussed.
Well, the county has their own infrastructure that needs to be expanded at the industrial park. Water and sewer to the east side of the highway, extending it on up to the other side, and then our own well. You know, that isn't our water that we're using there.
Well, does it belong to the county?
It belongs to Waste Management. That's the old Smythe Brothers well. They're on the Stone Ranch.
it seems to me with Shetler Station, it would be helpful to have sort of a, kind of a master plan for Shetler Station, really.
Yeah.
What development needs to take place and when, kind of how to sequence that.
There is some preliminary stuff that was done, but, you know, there's a huge opportunity on the east side of the highway. If that was developed, there's probably a good chance that Campbell Crane would be there. But there's no sewer and water.
Well, the derelict building issue at Shetler Station as well, we need to address that. Where are we going with the drain lab? What do we need to do to market it?
So,
I think that's a 9-month to 1 year thing, because it's just, it's doing
It costs a
nothing.
fortune to
It's-
sit there and-
Yes. Keep the heat on and.
so sorry, what,
The Grain Lab is the explore options for derelict buildings.
Got it.
County-owned.
got it.
That's at Shetler Station. And it's sitting vacant.
Derelict doesn't make it sound very good, you know.
Well, it is, because it is.
It's a beautiful building.
It is an absolutely
A vacant building.
Yeah.
overly beautiful building
Yeah.
with much potential.
Yeah.
But
It feels like,
We have some obstacles that need to be overcome in order to.
it feels like what might be
Make it
reachable
workable.
in the first year is maybe just getting that master plan together, identifying what those projects are that would really increase the capabilities up there, our ability to market it, all those kinds of things. And kind of identifying those and sequencing them so that we kind of have a work plan that we can start working through and budgeting toward. You know, if we're needing to extend utilities there, you know, we can, that's doable. We just need to identify what needs to be done and budget for it.
Wonder how much of that information has been put together by, like, board?
What's that?
Has the port
Port
done
is-
any,
Is there been any steps towards something like that been accomplished by the port?
For Shetler.
For
For-
Shetler Station?
For Shelter Station?
For the improvements
No,
in
the
Shelter.
the county did all of that,
yeah.
yeah.
I just didn't know, you know, I know
Peter
Peter was
has,
quite involved in, you know, in
yeah, he has some stuff for that,
like the
but
green lab.
Would Jeff have that information as well?
Jeff would probably have some of it, most of it's down in the vault downstairs.
I like it down there.
So we've got a couple things. A buildable land survey, which my understanding is that Rachel's already working with Public Works and that some staff might be deployed to interface with cities and get that rolling.
Yeah, to clarify, Rachel, I think, started it.
Yeah, but it
Condon,
wasn't done.
But I don't think it ever got finished, and I don't think there was ever an effort to do that at the north end.
I
So
see.
we would be tasking Rachel to kind of make that
Great.
a deliverable.
All right. And then there's the summary status of current projects, but really it seems like the focus of that comes down first to Shetler Station. And the beautiful but currently unoccupied, not to be called derelict, building there. So those are ambitious, interesting ideas for 9 months to a year.
Is it too ambitious for 9 months to a year?
No, but there's just it's a couple of things. So who would be taking the lead on the buildable land survey?
So I supervise Rachel, so I will take that
Okay.
and work with her on doing that.
Great. And who might be in a position to take the lead on current projects with the focus on beginning to develop a master plan for Shetler Station?
That Shelter Station is my
Great. You
responsibility.
guys are making this pretty easy. I shouldn't say that. That's what you always say before everything goes completely to pieces, you know. Anyway. All right. You good for this for right now?
Yes.
Perfect. So we are ahead of schedule. So questions and comments. Here's your last shot at housing, technology and communication, and infrastructure. If anyone has had some additional thoughts that they would like to add. Catherine?
I had one other question, is on the housing, when we were talking about so many people coming into the county, and I know waste management is, you brought up, I think waste management is, I think if we had, also once we had the houses for these people to live in, public transportation to get to the site every day, and I know they're offering that from Boardman, but it would be kind of nice to offer it from the south end of the county, so people would live here.
It seemed to me that that was on the
And I know that,
table too.
I think it was being discussed, but just
I
having,
thought they did do that.
I didn't think they had done it yet, but I know it was being talked about, but just having transportation from north to south for people that are working, and even the other way too, because we have several people that work up here in Condon that are coming that way, instead of having 5 cars on the road.
It was talked about 25 years ago.
And like the joint.
But we have a very
High
robust
school
transportation
college, right?
department now that I'm thinking, if
Yeah, we
anyone
have
can
a
do it, the
robust
robust transportation
transportation.
department can. Anyway, that's the only one I heard.
Marla would be all over that.
Any other comments or questions about those categories before we leave them behind? No? All right, so we're 25 minutes ahead.
Yay.
Cheers go up.
She likes that you're here, don't
I
say
have,
that.
no, but you know what I'm dealing with.
I do. Okay, well this, you can see that my PowerPoint skills leave some things to be desired. I'm not even really very fond of PowerPoint at all. But
Suffer with that myself. So.
it's like, what's the best way to work through this stuff? So business development and healthcare were areas where the court, through my listening, felt they would need to partner with others that are involved in these already. So let's just hit business development. So there's a lot on here. Needless to say, Encompass expansion and retention services was the focus. Bringing in new business, yes, but how do we support the businesses that are already here? Entrepreneurial development and support, as well as new business recruitment to the area. And some of the ideas that came up were focused support on expansion and retention, as I just said, of current businesses. Clarify business development roles, responsibilities, and expectations between the Port of Arlington and the court. So the port manager as county business development officer. It wasn't that the spirit behind this was, we don't want this anymore. The spirit behind this was, we'd really like to have some better clarification of how that's supposed to work and what the roles and responsibilities are. Once again, with the development of fiber, there may be the potential to recruit alumni of the county to return home and telecommute. Attract business to empty buildings in the industrial park. Here we are back at Shuttler Flat again.
That's the derelict building.
Yeah, exactly. Attract businesses to the derelict building.
High-end.
Address controversy over ICE contract in our local 4-county corrections facility. That was just something that was put on the table. Create referrals. Referrals resources for those seeking funding. Once again, an idea, seek operator for empty restaurant in Arlington. Those were just some of the ideas that were put on the table. It doesn't mean they're the only ones that we can discuss today, but of those, are there some that appear to be more on the immediate front burner for the court for the next 9 months to a year?
For me, some of these, so like the alumni to return home, I think is all going to be kind of dependent on us getting the fiber stuff done. So that's not a more immediate, yeah, housing. Out of all of those, I think the thing that is sort of the low-hanging fruit and would be really good for us to address is how our relationship with the Port of Arlington will work. So what's our expectations on both sides, how that responsibility, sort of how we're divvying that up, or how the partnership works between the two entities. Because I think the port's definitely been focused more on economic development, I think, than just running a port. But I don't know that the expectations were ever clearly defined between the two entities. And so I think it might be helpful for both sides to kind of just know, here's the nature of our partnership, how we're going to work together moving forward. And I think that's kind of got to be in place really before you even talk about how you're going to expand or retain businesses, because it helps to know who's in charge of what then. So that for me is kind of I think that's reachable and probably kind of critical to getting the next steps in place, is figuring out what that relationship looks like.
It should be a partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you see spearheading that conversation, or is that a group? Is that a team that gets together, or is that, how do you see that working, Liz?
Well, we have one of our board members sitting in the front row, so.
In the front row, let's see.
Dewey.
That'd be Dewey?
Yeah, be.
It just depends on which hat I put on.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so, I mean, for me, I'm not sure actually, to be honest, how best to structure that conversation. We are doing a joint meeting for a non-related item, but maybe that's sort of, I mean, I guess I kind of like to see how that conversation goes and see if that is a structure that could just work where boards are meeting boards, basically, and having a discussion about that.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm not quite sure yet on how to structure that. What do you guys think?
Well, I think the two boards working in a partnership is going to be a really big asset for the county. I mean, we all have to get on the same wavelength and support each other in order to make any of these things we want to do happen.
I
So-
agree with Sherry.
The two boards, so the port has a board, what's the other board?
Yes.
This one.
You're it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you guys, okay.
Yeah.
I get it, okay, I was wondering, where's this other,
Us.
some other group we're talking about?
No, not throwing in a third one,
But when you don't,
The
when you're
Board
not
of
sure.
Men and the Board of Women.
Okay, yeah, so when you're not sure that you really want to do it, you call yourself a board, and then when you are sure, you call yourself the court?
Oh, well, I was just shorthanding it, I guess, so that I didn't have to say the board and the court.
Okay, got it, okay, great. So, and, yeah, yes,
Judge, could I offer up a quick comment here
Sure.
please.
without getting myself in trouble? But Judy was where I was last night at the 3-hour-plus session of the court commission. And out of all that, before I left, Judy, I got to thinking, and what I want to throw out here for the court to look at in terms of maybe a possible option it could add to the list there. I'm not quite sure how to say this, but in some of the other arenas I've had the opportunity to participate in, one of them keeps coming back to my mind and did last night. That was the Salem Housing Authority. It actually is the Salem City Council sitting as a housing authority. And they take in a few extra folks like you do as a budget committee through the budget process where there's the 3 of you and 3 lay people. So my thought is, why can't we give some thought at least, or look into the possibility of perhaps having the court sit as the port authority, but bring in maybe not a whole lot more people to make it that cumbersome or anything, but just make it the port authority, the court retaining the policy aspect of things, and yet also involving the port commissioners as, or what would be differently named probably in all of that. Does that make any sense what I'm saying? I mean, maybe not make sense, but are you understanding what I'm saying? In other words,
So they function, so would we be talking then about are you talking then about restructuring the port board so that the makeup of that includes the 3 court members plus additional, is that how they're
Yeah, it's
structuring
kind
it? Or
of-
is it
it's
a
kind of
layer
versatile.
above the port board where
I'm
the
not
2
quite sure how it would work, Judge, except that right now you have 2 entities, and they're both their separate own jurisdictions. The Port Commission is countywide, obviously, and I'm not quite sure how it would work. I'm just saying, well, there's that picture of what I was getting to, the more important collaboration that needs to occur, and the retention or putting in the port's portfolio the true ability to govern economic development affairs. And I'm not quite sure how you do that. I just was using the Salem example kind of because as a housing authority, the council is sitting in directing the policy, but it leaves to its housing advisory committee and it's the director of housing to actually run the operation. And I'm just, what was attractive to that to me is that I think however the structure is, Commissioner Wilkins's observation of it needing to be a partnership that works is what's most important. And quite frankly, I've seen over the last couple of years a little bit of a separation there in terms of which jurisdiction actually has what's the part of the boat that you operate, the rudders or all of that you operate things with?
Yeah.
I think out of the goal setting process, it may not have to be today, obviously, or down the road, but out of the process, there needs to be a really coming to an understanding of that and how, like what the judge is asking, how it actually is going to work. Because I heard some exasperation last night, and I don't mean to be speaking for you or for the other members of the commission, but there definitely was that exasperation as to what are we doing here if the court is going to be making us go through all of the economic development processes there are for gaining the grant dollars that we're supposed to be more or less putting out or deciding as to where they're going to go. I better be quiet before I get it.
No, I mean, but I think that's helpful, right? 'Cause from the court's perspective, I could see how it's, if previous courts have charged the port with doing economic development, then it stands to reason that the court would be providing those funds and the port would be dispersing them or identifying opportunities for economic development. So I could definitely see that. I think where there's maybe the disconnect is, I guess from the port, or for the court's perspective, I think, at least my perspective would be, if we're not controlling where those funds are going, then it is a grant, kind of. So I think that's where the disconnect is happening, is we've sort of charged, or previous courts have charged the port with doing economic development, but we're treating this not as a partnership, more as a, we're providing the funding and you're doing your projects kind of thing, rather than sort of a holistic oversight of that process is maybe what we're missing, I think. There's a disconnect there.
I would just add one thing, then I will try to be quiet. That is that one of the most important aspects of that are the SIP dollars, the Strategic Investment Program dollars. And there is and this is something that maybe the port doesn't quite completely grasp, there is that required statutory handle at the court's level for how those dollars are to be used and why. And that really does need to be kept in mind, and I wouldn't want to limit either of the jurisdictions' abilities into how they could both use those. What I'm obviously most interested in is that there be that public participation and access to the decision-making involved at either level.
I'm kind of curious how much interaction, how, say, the Port of Morrow and Morrow County Court or their commission interact. If the port's fully self-sustaining, because they go like gangbusters there and they just don't even need to worry about what that partnership even looks like. I'm not sure. I'm just kind of throwing it out there as I don't know how that.
I know the road department and the port butt heads continually, just because of the volume that happens down there and the demands that they put on the road system. So I don't think I don't think that the county and the Port of Morrow are very connected. I think the Port of Morrow is pretty much self-sustaining. They're just booming down there to where they don't need the county. Where the port, in order for us to continue to survive, we basically have to have the county. And so it's hard for us to promote economic development, go after this stuff where we have to wait, I guess. So I think a sit-down meeting between the two boards to come to a decision, how are we going to function? And if, are we going to continue to do it the way we're doing it now? And if so, then it'll probably go a different direction.
Is there currently some kind of formal agreement, or is it more like over time the courts loosely delegated or maybe explicitly or implicitly delegated economic development duties to the port, and it's just sort of evolved in its own way? Or?
The county used to have the county used to have an economic development coordinator in the county system, and that person, I believe, resigned, and rather than refilling that position, they just sort of made a verbal agreement with the port to replace that.
And the way it's kind of functioned in effect is that if there's a project that the port is working on that requires, more than what we would normally put in, then usually it's Peter and some of the port boards coming and sort of pitching a project to the court. And the court's making decisions about whether to fund them or not. And then there's an additional, and Les were both referencing, is that we have historically asked the port to come to us through kind of this grant process. So they have to come year by year and ask for funds.
Got it.
And the budget committee decides
Got it.
how much to provide. So, but there's never been this is how it's going to operate, or this is how oversight would look. Nothing formalized, really. We've just sort of operated project by project without really kind of
Okay.
formalizing the rules. Less.
Since,
Yep.
and that's a very good point that I think it would behoove the court to sort of do a little bit of, maybe ask Sandy to do something more here, but to put a compilation together of the history of all of that, at least back the last 25 years or so, because bottom line, I think we all know that this has been one of the more political discussions or conversations that there have been over the years, is what role and who is going to take it on does the county play in terms of economic development, and where does that fit into the actual structure of things? And make a long story short, Judge Pryor, if I'm recalling correctly, when this was first kind of conceived and brought forth, it was going to be a position that the county retained, and for a lot of different reasons, it's ended up where it is now. But I think it would really behoove you guys as a part of this goal setting process to take a look back at the history of it all and have that in front of you for your joint session between the two bodies.
I think one thing, of course, that B.G. King was pretty much the very first economic development officer, and I've been here 25 years so that I can remember. But what happened was it was economic development / planner. When B.G. King left and Susie Anderson came into the picture, just going to give a little bit of history. And then Susie got really inundated with all the windmill projects at one time. So eventually they started saying, okay, you've got too much to do. You're just going to be a planner, and let's push this econ development someplace else. And slowly that's how it got kind of pushed that port area, that portway. So that's just a little bit of history that I can remember.
And to cap it all off, the Port District itself was created courtesy of the ballot measure.
So it sounds like in terms of attainable steps, that maybe there needs to be a joint meeting scheduled between the two boards to talk about sort of creating a formal kind of agreement on how this would look, roles and responsibilities, kind of oversight, and I think that would get into what's an appropriate structure for overseeing the partnership. So maybe that is a joint economic development board that includes parts of the port board and parts of the court, and they have to sign off on projects or something. I mean, something where, because I think that what's happening is, I've sensed at least that there's, I think, a reluctance, or at least I feel a reluctance to just necessarily hand the port money without really knowing and sort of providing oversight to how those projects are rolling out. But then I also understand from the port's perspective, they're their own taxing district, like they have their own board, so it's kind of figuring out how to mesh that so that I think you have appropriate accountability and that people are in their right lanes and doing,
And did you say that there was a meeting scheduled and you wanted to see how that meeting would go, or did I mishear you?
Yeah, so we have a meeting over a separate, it was a previous joint project that we did that went sideways. And so there's a IGA that has never been sort of dispensed with that's sitting out there that needs to be, the two parties need to decide how we're going to modify that or what that would look like, because it requires, the county in essence put out some money for a project that ended up not being built or had to be sort of taken out. And there was a repayment as part of that IGA that has just never, it's, what, 12 years, 13 years old, and it's never been resolved on whether the port needs to pay it back or what that would look like.
So
So,
is the, I'm not proposing one way or the other, but is the better thing to do to get the structure squared away and then address that payment? Or is the better thing to do to address that, try to address that payment without addressing the structure?
it's a good question.
I think we need to address the IGA first.
We really do need to
Yeah.
resolve
It
that
needs-
issue.
It needs to get resolved as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. That'll determine the life of the port.
Okay, so that's what I'm hearing. I don't want to act like it's a decision, but to consider addressing the IGA first and then to set up, maybe not to conflate those meetings, but to then set up a separate meeting to address the structure would make more sense than trying to untangle both those things in the same meeting.
Yeah, I think that would probably be a
And-
productive.
And Judge, is that going to be your specialty, or are you kicking that over to Sherry or Leslie over there?
I mean, I'll be in charge of scheduling probably, because it comes with Sandy and I that set those schedules, so, but the full court.
Board
would
to
be-
board, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Court
great.
to, court to board.
Court to board,
So it
right,
would be, all
got
three
it.
of us would be at the discussion itself.
Great.
Dewey, can you remind me when did the port become countywide? How long ago was that?
08, 07, 08?
It's longer than that, isn't it?
Yeah,
Well,
this is
the-
an agreement of
Not when it became a countywide.
Because I thought Laura Pryor was still judge then, and Pat Shaw's already done 6 years, and Steve's
Has he?
done 6 years. So there's 12. And
Because I wasn't quite on the board
I think it
when we were
was-
crushing down there.
I'm not sure the years, but I didn't get old, I'll tell you, but I think it had something to do with expanding the districts. It
Yeah.
already existed, but they.
Right, they went the
expanded
countywide.
Yeah,
districts.
it's when they expanded, that's when I got on the board.
So it's been there for quite a while,
And-
to be sure.
And what predicated that? What,
It was,
I can't remember, I just can't remember. I mean, I
it was
remember
funding.
but
It was to help with the funding, so that the port could expand. And that's when we were looking at, the dock was, we were in the process of building the dock, the road, expanding the quarry, doing the crushing, and then we got shut down. That was in '06.
But politically speaking, and I know I'm interrupting here, but politically speaking, it had a lot to do with the fact that there wasn't the achievement at this table, court's table, that some were expecting, and so there was a reach out to find a way to achieve it the other way. People talk about it. May I just add one other thing before you guys really do kick me out of here? I'd like to take the opportunity to back up just a little bit, because I think there's a tie here to business development and the previous slide that you had up there, and Dewey would certainly be at the helm of it, and that's the county's road system. And I'm thinking that out of this work session, you guys need to look at somehow tying the two together, because you've just created the road committee, and its work has been somewhat outlined. And to me, doing that establishes somewhat of a priority. And I'd sure like to see, speaking as one of the newly appointed members of that group, I'd like to see eventually the work of the roadmaster and the committee be recognized a little bit more than it has over the past 10 or 15 years. And I'm not saying that critically. There have been a lot of reasons for the not having recognized it and recognizing it. But I'm just saying that I think one of the things you'd be looking at in terms of infrastructure for sure, and also the previous slide that was presented, that needs to be added to the list of priorities, wouldn't you?
I didn't bring it up because it wasn't one of your bullet points, as far as,
Well, and I yeah, I thought about that before the meeting, and then I didn't bring it up either. But, I guess I was thinking that that was something that we would be looking at in the budget process, and whether or not it needed to be part of this or not, I wasn't sure.
And that's, well, actually, that's why I'm here. I wasn't for sure if that was going to be part of the discussion, James.
I'm just saying that there definitely needs to be an understanding, or not an understanding, but a recognition, I guess is a better word, amongst the three of you and I'd say the roadmaster and others, that working to address the road needs of this county has got to be a higher priority than it's been in the past. Whether that be through the budget process or through the goal-setting process or however it works, that's what needs to happen.
I mean, I think it's worth to at least, when you're capturing, Lindsay, when you're capturing sort of, because I think, I hear your point, completely support it. I think when I was coming up with these, I was thinking of things that we wouldn't normally be doing in the course of business. Like I was kind of thinking, well, Dewey will come before our budget, he will have identified what he needs, kind of thing. So I was kind of looking, I don't know if you guys were when you were talking to Lindsay, but I was kind of looking over and above what we would normally do in the course of business. But it's probably worthwhile, since this will be a public document, I wouldn't want people looking at it and thinking, well, they're not prioritizing the county roads.
Sure.
So I think it's worth it to make note of it and duly noted. It just, from the way I was kind of thinking of it was kind of I guess a no-brainer that we were going to be supporting the road department, but I think it's worthwhile to make that explicit in the goal document.
It will be. Thank you.
How are we doing now?
Well, okay, we were supposed to start healthcare at 2:40, and it is 2:26. Yes, Catherine?
I do have one on the business development too, is right now the county and the city are involved in a economic opportunity analysis with commercial and industrial lands. And one thing that's come up that is going to be talked about is the availability, what I would like to see added too, instead of, there's industrial lands in our UGB and that the airport is not developed. And so it is something that I would like to see as a business development on the goals. Granted, it may be after a year, but to have, I think that's something that needs to be looked at, especially since we're going through the grant right now too. And they're pinning jobs to it and things like that, so.
That's the airport in Condon that she's
Sorry.
referencing.
Which is a state-owned airport outside of our UGB. But they're talking about the ground between the airport and us, but we're also, the county's involved in this grant and the airport has been a discussion in this.
So just to clarify so that I can be sure to report it properly, I heard availability of industrial land,
Yes.
and I heard the airport in Condon, and that was outside the UGB.
Urban growth boundary.
Yeah, right. But are those two separate things, or is the availability of industrial lands sort of like the mapping of the residential lands that we talked about?
All their mapping is commercial and industrial land.
Okay.
And then what type of jobs can go on those.
Okay.
But one of the things they've found through this is if someone, like a small manufacturer, needs 4 acres, we don't have 4 acres in one spot in industrial lands. It would have to be in the UGB, or either extend the UGB or the county take on areas around the airport. Or the Port of Arlington, since they are countywide.
Very good.
So it's sort of, if we think of the north, or the south end's kind of version of like creating, looking at like what could be around the airport, kind of mapping out what, because there's an extension of utilities potentially that would need to happen, some other stuff that we need to be looking at.
Great. All right. How about,
Okay.
let's take a look at healthcare. Now, this was an area for potential partnership. It's not an area that, at least through my listening, the court felt they would lead, but support healthcare services in Gilliam, for Gilliam residents, both sustaining and expanding local services offered. And there was the opportunity to partner with the health district boards and administrators in their leadership role. How that partnership or what that partnership effort might look like wasn't clearly defined. Work with health districts to strengthen relationships and increase cooperation with regional partners. Review possible compensation structure for firefighters and paramedics, which I understand are currently volunteer positions. Promote use of medical facility and providers in Arlington. There's not a pharmacy in Arlington, but the idea was that there might be ways that the court could partner to help promote the use of the medical facilities in Arlington. And then there was just the general sense, once again, that if some of the more foundational concerns like housing were brought into balance, the population growth and development could lead to higher levels of medical service, and the ultimate goal there was to help retain senior populations. So anything here jump out as something that you would want to put some effort into in the next 9 months? As opposed to incorporating some of these in the future strategic plan, that is.
Well, if you come up with that transportation thing for the employees, you can send the prescriptions, shoveled in with the transportation bus for Condon to Arlington.
Wow.
Well, Murray's already delivers once or twice a week fossil from Boardman.
Oh, do they? Okay,
From their
yeah.
Boardman pharmacy.
I know
to
Maurice
ours.
is, I
Oh, do
mean,
they?
I would say
know.
that to really get them involved as well, if you do something with that, because they are very willing to work with you and willing to do stuff. I know that they do a lot of transportation of.
And who is this?
Our local pharmacy in Condon.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I talked to he's the paramedic, but what is his title as far as,
Clinic administrator.
okay?
Yeah.
I talked to him a little bit about, their needs, a little bit before I met with our facilitator. And, and I was asking questions about, dental, a pharmacy, x-ray machine, things like that. And his big point to me was, can you try to get people to use our facility? That was where we needed the most help. And, and then there was the issue with waste management and then pulling their business. So that's the one that, and I don't know if that's anything that's 9 months or greater, but, and I don't know how to help them with that either, other than continuing talks with waste management, but they lost a lot of business some time ago, and it just, building that back has been a struggle.
Well, what is the level of their care, I guess, is my question, because you never know. I mean, they don't have a PA on staff, right?
I'm trying to think of what is the title of the person they have down there now.
Is it just an RN? Or and then
PA
or whatever?
now, I thought.
Yeah.
That has a lot to do with what you have, who can come see you, depending on the level of care that you provide. I know that it's been up and down there, and they've also up and down with their hours, from different days to when they're open and when they were closed. So.
Well, and I heard at some point in time that they were going to have to reduce their hours because of, the waste management situation. And I don't know if that happened, but I know that was something that they were seriously having to consider just because of the drop in business.
So
This
is there
what their hours are on here.
is there a role for the court in supporting the situation?
I don't know.
Well, the previous court is the reason there is a medical facility there in the first place. So, continued support is, I guess.
We, in recent years, put a lot of money into the Condon clinic as well, upgrading their facilities.
And I know there was recently a lot of discussion about a dental, about trying to get dental in Arlington.
which they do have. It's coming, actually. Advantage Dental can do a, I forget what she was at our LCAC meeting last week, but she can do virtual dental. So she's there, and it's this special chair where it connects with a dentist in one of their other offices who can do the exam remotely.
Well, I was just about to
So
say.
she's there for it with a
Interesting.
chair.
I want to go to a virtual dentist.
And then she does the cleaning. So she's a hygienist, so she can do the cleanings, but the actual exam has to be done by a dentist. And so they're able to come into the clinic, they've set her up with a little spot, she'll do their cleanings, and then it's connected virtually with a dentist in, I think in Boardman, they have an office. So that dentist actually checks their teeth. And so it's a one-stop shop. And I thought she said that she was already set up there. So I think that is already happening now. So get your teeth cleaned there.
I want to do it virtually, all virtually.
But in terms of how we can support, one of the things that I've noticed, because I sit on the LCAC board, Local Community Advisory, what is that? What does LCAC stand for?
Local
Community Advisory
Community
Council?
Advisory Committee.
Which is basically the Oregon Health Plan patients. And one of the things I've noticed so far is that none of the providers are sitting at that table right now. So sometimes public health is there, and they're a provider. Gobi is there because they are through their EO, CCO, that's the money that's coming through for those. But the providers themselves are not usually at the table. So I'm wondering if maybe that's an area where we could visit potential strengthening of partnerships. Because a lot of those clients, or the Oregon Health clients, are being sent a lot of times to the Dallas they're going, which is kind of a double-edged sword because our transportation department is the one that's transporting them and they're being paid to transport them. So we'll lose one way or the other, depending on if they're more local, then we lose out on the transportation dollars. But if they are local, then there may be additional revenue that's coming into our providers. So they should be at the table, though, I think, because we are talking about delivering services. So maybe worth visiting with them about maybe reasons why they haven't been involved previously and seeing if there's a way to kind of revisit those partnerships and see if they would like to be more involved with those partners.
So is that a meeting that you would arrange? Or that you would delegate to someone to arrange, or that someone else would arrange?
I'm on the LCAC board, so it probably makes sense for me to do that outreach and just check in with Holly and Dave and see if that's something that they're interested in engaging in.
I know everybody's going to be tired of me saying this, but, because it's going to come up in everything for me. The divide between the districts. They're not working together, they're not communicating, is that a fact? I mean, they're not supporting each other, they're just two totally separate entities that.
The administrators are, I can know this, but those administrators, the Morrow Clinic, the Arlington Clinic, the Condon Clinic, and the Asher Clinic are having meetings now. The administrators from all of those are meeting, and I know that because Holly has told me that.
Okay.
So I do know that, so.
So there may be more coordination
Yeah, that
that's
sounds
happening.
positive, thank you.
I mean, I really feel like for the most part, the healthcare, I'm happy to help support, but for me, ultimately, both health districts have boards that I think are far more able to identify areas where they can move the needle for the community. And so I'm more likely to think there are ways that we can help identify resources, or if there's problems that the board feels needs a larger conversation or something, that we can help facilitate those. But, you know, if there's an issue with the state or something, you know, I think that a lot of times our role to kind of weigh in on larger policy issues, but I'm just not sure, you know. And like, for instance, I'm happy to help if the North Health District came in and said, you know, we need to do public outreach to be able to get folks in our doors, and we could use assistance with that or something. I mean, I think that may be more of our role than us trying to figure out how to get people in the door there.
So you're thinking, rather than partner, that this one should be bumped to support?
I mean, I kind of feel that way unless they're saying to us, these are specific things that we need you to partner on. Because I'm just not, I mean, they have boards that I feel like could identify for us if there's places where we can engage and how we can be supportive. But I don't want to get us down a path where every time there's a problem in the county, it's the courts to solve. If there's a board that should be entrusted with resolving that, I don't want to be stepping in and saying, no, this is the courts to take on how many people are showing up at the clinic. I mean, if they're coming to us and saying, we need resources to be able to, I don't know, do immunizations in schools to try to get families in earlier or something, then maybe that's something that we can play a role in bringing resources to. But I just feel like we would be stepping on the toes of the actual board to try to take these on as our goals without them really identifying a need for us.
Great, so.
And I agree with you there, because I get approached by people about issues, and I have said to them, you need to probably talk to their board.
That's not our role.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do want to see if there's a potential, you know, like I said, I do sit on the LCAC board. It would be nice to have the local perspective, because I think, as Dewey's point was talking about, it's like when the state issues something, it doesn't always work. I'm even finding in the LCAC that a lot of the people at the table are even from the Dalles,
Right.
and even then it doesn't quite work with the county, so I'd like to see if there's a way to engage them there. But that, again, is going to be up to them and their boards and whether they think that's worthwhile. But just my, I guess, personal goal is to see if we can maybe get a little bit more engagement on that board.
Okay. Great. So here's an opportunity to final comments on business development or healthcare. And then I also had penciled in the possibility of a 10-minute break, which
We'd at least do 5.
How about 5?
yeah. And so, great. Any further questions, comments before we move on from business development and healthcare? Okay, 5-minute break. Rock and roll.
I'll be back in session.
All right, so
Yes, right, exactly.
areas where the court felt they might want to play a more supporting role, which we now realize healthcare might well be in this category as well. Recreation and tourism, education, and community image. So community image, by the way, was just a phrase that I pulled from the previous strategic plan. And I just want to say that's, you know, open, I think, to interpretation, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So with recreation and tourism, tourism development and recreational opportunities for Gilliam County residents, which can be shared with visitors, and some of the ideas there were to really figure out ways to promote Gilliam County's world-class Columbia River windsurfing, and that there was some real opportunity to develop that. And that Travel Oregon offers a program called Tourism Studio, and there was a suggestion that the county might want to engage with Travel Oregon to do that. Work with the Port and City of Arlington to promote tourism. I think that's also connected to potentially windsurfing and development of some additional facilities, maybe at the River Beach. Support Avangrid. Avangrid, as I understand it, is putting in a new wind development, and they have expressed some interest in being more engaged in the life of the community, so maybe there would be a way to engage them. And there was a thought of looking at options for developing wind energy tourism product and package, which might be really interesting to some people. Consider ways to draw Cottonwood Canyon visitors to the county, promote hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation opportunities, and then once again, develop recreational opportunities for kids at the river beach. So there was some sense, just to say it, that some of this might fall to the chambers, that the role of the court might be somewhat limited, but there was also some considerable passion on the court about opportunities that might exist in these resources, and some sense of urgency that there might be some places where the court could leverage its efforts to support these initiatives. So, following our usual pattern, are there things here that jump out? Any and all of this can be included in the larger strategic plan, but are there things here that jump out as something that the court might want to support or partner or get involved in during the next 9 months to a year?
I'll jump in here, because I think normally if it was, I guess under previous courts, I probably would have said that this is more of a supporting role, but maybe because I just came from the tourism world, that I feel like there's maybe an opportunity for at least me as a representative on the court to leverage my relationships with Travel Oregon, my previous clients that I had, that can bring resources into the county in bigger ways than maybe our chambers would. It's not that our chambers don't do a good job. I think they do a great job. It's just there's some connections that I think my previous relationships might be able to bring additional resources in that maybe our chambers might not know exist, that I know are there. So, I mean, I actually feel like we could be more of a lead on some of these between my partnerships and Rachel's relationships within Travel Oregon and EOVA, to actually bring in the Rural Tourism Studio, which that is basically Travel Oregon brings in experts that are able to talk to the community about here are potential opportunities, here's how to be visitor ready. So here are things that you need to know about who is traveling to Oregon, why they're here, what causes them to pick one destination over another, and here's what you can do within your business to be ready to welcome them. And so I think that's maybe something that the cities and ports could take part in, but I would really, the tourism work, I think really works best if you let tourism people do it. I hate to say it, but I think they know where those resources are. They're using marketing professionals that know how to reach certain segments of the population. Travel Oregon has all kinds of data on who's likely to be a windsurfer, what else are they interested in when they're here, how many days are they here, what countries are they coming from. All of those things that I think are outside of the reach of what even our budget could do. I mean, Travel Oregon's got a budget larger than we do. So that would be my sort of pitch, I guess, is that this would be one of those things that our community development department would take the lead on and really push, particularly the windsurfing in Arlington can be the driver for that, because it's a product that's already developed, which is huge for tourism. That people just don't know that it exists. It's a lot easier to market something than it is to create something out of thin air, and we don't have to create this. So I guess I'm selling you guys on it. I don't know how you feel about it, but I personally have a passion toward it, but probably that's because I'm just stepping out of that world, and I just see that we're leaving dollars on the table. And just in initial conversations I've had with Travel Oregon, they were all about trying to help a former colleague bring revenue and visitors here. So I don't necessarily want to cede that to the port or the cities to do that, because that relationship isn't going to work without the right people at the table asking for those resources.
Mr. Kennedy?
We actually talked last night at our port meeting about a live camera, live streaming camera that shows the river, shows the wind, shows the waves.
Oh,
It's
that
something
would be-
that we're looking into
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
You know, it streams live. I don't know how it works, but
yeah.
Yeah,
Is
so
it
they
the
can see what the
KOIN
conditions are, they know where to
yeah,
go.
I think so.
KOIN News, I
Yeah.
think, was part of that.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's a live stream, and so Peter's looking into that, you know, where to set it up, what's the best view for
Yeah.
people to see and stuff. So we're working real hard on that. That's our best generator, is the beach and the jetty out there for the windsurfing, so.
Cool.
And I should rephrase that I'm not saying that we should just take the lead and not involve all the other partners. I'm just thinking that there's some connections that we have that could bring resources that would help the port market,
Right.
the port, things like that, where we can take more of a leadership role, because we being Rachel and I know where those dollars are and where those resources are within the tourism structure.
So, are you thinking that you and Rachel, or that you would delegate to Rachel to, in the Community Development Department, to interface, to do a proactive interface with Travel Oregon as a starting action?
Yeah.
And then maybe build out some kind of framework that you could then bring to the other players?
Yeah, I think we would probably start by pitching Travel Oregon on doing a tourism studio.
Great.
And the tourism studios usually are attached to dollars. So as soon as they have one here, then you're prioritized in their grant funding process. So once they come in, they want to keep investing in the same communities they've been in. They don't leave the communities usually. And so that's why you need the tourism studio to anchor Travel Oregon's funding commitment long-term for the organization.
So just a question, a stupid question, what is a tourism studio?
That's not a stupid question.
Okay. I'm just kind of curious, I mean,
So-
is it, setting up actually in an office somewhere, or what?
No,
Okay.
so they come in, it's a program that they do, and it depends on, sometimes they'll do a tourism studio that's just a very niche kind of type of tourism, so they may have like an outdoor rec. And so Travel Oregon will just come in and they'll basically do, and it's for the community to participate in. They're all about like bringing in anybody basically that would interact with a tourist when they're in town. And they basically go through, here are the visitors that would be looking at that kind of so they sort of look at what you have to offer in the community. And based on that, they say, these are the types of visitors that would be drawn to your community. So if you're pitching windsurfing, here are the types of visitors that we have, demographics, how much they spend, what countries they come from, all that kind of stuff. And then from there, they actually, for businesses that are either interested, either have existing products, so if you had, say like if Marta wanted to come in and talk about having, I don't know, if Arlington Hardware was going to carry rentals or something, they would talk to them about, okay, here are the things that you want to look at from a tourist perspective, what they're going to need to actually plan a visit here. Here are the resources that you're lacking. So, you don't have adequate restaurants for this, or your restaurant hours may need to be, and so they kind of help the community identify how to be, they call it visitor ready. So in essence, they're not going to market a community until the community is ready to offer the best experience possible. So it kind of depends on where they catch you at. If they look at you and say, you know what, you're actually ready for us to send you, then the tourism studio may be geared more to how to market yourself. But if it's more of a product, what we would call product development, so maybe there's potential there, like, hey, we've got great wind, but may not have the businesses downtown that need to support, then they sort of help identify, okay, here's some of your holes. And for those business owners that are at the table, here's what you can do to sort of boost your margin and reach those visitors. And so they bring in different experts from their team depending on what the community is identifying as the need. And usually these last over, it kind of depends. The John Day River Territory did one where it was the 4 counties together. And so that's why I think we may be able to pitch Travel Oregon to come back in and kind of do a revamp of it, but pick Arlington to be the sort of host of it. So that's kind of the nutshell. And then from there, it opens up grant opportunities, because as an alumni of the tourism studio, there's certain grant pools that are sitting there that they then free up money to help implement some of the ideas that the tourism studio comes up with.
Great. So I'm going to suggest putting that in the goals plan under yourself and Rachel for now.
Yeah.
And then obviously, once again, not a final decision, but something to be put in the document.
Yeah.
Great.
When I talk to people, I talked to some people in Arlington about this upcoming meeting and what would they like to see in it. It was a group of moms, and they were wanting more recreational opportunities for the kids at Arlington. One of the things they mentioned was I can't remember what it's called now, splash pad, something like that.
Yeah.
You know, they were just like, oh, that's something like that would be great downtown. But it was interesting to me, because out of all the choices that were available, they were like, we need stuff for the kids to do.
Great. Okay. Education. So this is another area where the court felt they could be supportive of existing efforts, enhancement of current K-12 school programs, buildings, and education offerings, and increased continued education and/or training opportunities for Gilliam County residents. Once again, this goal was basically I just basically lifted it from the prior strategic plan. It may or may not be, current, or it might need to be spiffed up a bit in the future strategic plan. But some of the things that were brought forward were support the school district boards and administrators in their leadership role. How that might be done, we would want to flesh out a little bit. Consider creating an education endowment fund, which could provide some stable funding during lean times. And then prepare kids for trade school and not just college. So these were just brainstormed ideas of ways that the court might want to support education efforts in the county. Anything jump out as something you might want to take some action on in the next 9 months or so? Or is there anything that anyone would want to add to this list that might be relevant to the next 9 months?
What do you think?
I didn't have as much to say on this topic.
I didn't either. This is one of those others that I feel pretty strongly that
Boards.
they've got boards and administrators, and the one area, the endowment fund was one of my suggestions that we consider looking at long term, because both school districts do come to us for support, either operational or facility upgrades. And so I thought it might be prudent for us, to operate under the assumption that the state is going to continue to underfund our schools, and that part of our ability to attract young families here is going to be educational opportunities, and that it may be worthwhile to set aside something so that we can fill in during times when the state's really not meeting the needs of our school districts. So, that to me seems like more of our role is kind of plugging holes and helping provide resources when there's a big need, rather than sort of pushing the districts in one direction or another in terms of what programs they're offering or those sorts of things. I think that's why they have school boards.
Yeah, that's not our role, but.
So with
Funding
that,
is-
oh, sorry, I don't mean to
Go
interrupt
ahead.
you. With that in mind, is the spirit of this that most of these things
Farther
could be
out.
better addressed in a larger strategic plan at a later time, rather than trying to figure out how to parse them today.
Yeah, I mean, I think the endowment discussion, I think, is a larger discussion that needs to be had with the districts and kind of identifying where we can best help. I mean, both districts will have facilities needs long-term. I mean, they both have old buildings they're operating in, those kinds of things. But it feels like that needs to be that's a longer term, for me at least, a longer term discussion to have than what we can realistically tackle in
At this point, yeah.
Okay. Any further comments?
I would just to have it on the record, just say that we're giving the two school districts, I think last year, $900,000 a year. So the court is making significant contributions to both those schools and keeping them operating and basically doing what the state isn't, what the state's supposed to do. And so there is also a legislative push that could be made that a lot of rural schools are not getting the funding. We pay a lot more in tax revenue to the schools than we get back to the state school fund. That's why we're having to supplement the state.
Duly noted.
Yes, certainly, I think that advocacy role is obviously one. And I would say that with all the taxing districts, I think that's really a big role that we need to play is sort of lending the court whatever weight we may have. I don't know how much weight we actually have, but trying to persuade our legislators that they really need to look at how the decisions they're making impact our rural districts differently than they do in the valley, and really making that case.
So does that advocacy role occur in the normal course of things, or would you have to set aside a special block of time or a special venue, or how would that actually happen?
Mostly it involves us going to Salem and really being engaged with AOC and directly with the legislators on, when something's coming up. So it's kind of our normal course of business, but I think it's probably worthwhile. When we're talking about how do we support them in their leadership role, that's kind of really, I guess, what I'm thinking is that if there's things that are happening on a statewide level that are affecting them locally, it's providing support in terms of these are the things our schools are saying that they need in order to be able to do their jobs.
Great. Okay, is there anything else to add on education? All right, we are moving right along, and we are now at community image. And so this is about community beautification and civic pride activities, which will in turn lead to improved perception of our communities. I think this clearly ties into things like tourism, becoming visitor ready, becoming an attractive place, and work on a downtown revitalization project in Arlington and supporting public arts projects in Condon, mural at the county library, art installation, bike racks, continue to encourage improvements and solutions. We've already addressed the Shane Drive Trailer Park. We've already kind of looked at that under housing. Support development of the community vision and action plan for downtown Arlington. Explore University of Oregon program to bring in students and specialized skills to generate solutions in architecture, tourism, and other areas. So these are just some ideas of how the court might theoretically support communities in promoting and refining their community image. Anything here that looks like you might want to take some fairly immediate action to instigate?
I think this is your department.
This is mine again? Yeah, probably. So the art installation stuff, the bike racks are actually already happening in the Condon Chamber.
Are they bike racks or just the benches?
The bike racks.
Oh, I haven't.
Yeah, there was both bike racks and benches.
Okay.
Remember my little
Well, I haven't
cowboy?
Yes,
I
I do
send
remember
it
that,
to
but I just recently, Caitlin sent me a bunch of pictures of the benches, which are awesome.
She needs to send you the bike racks too.
Yeah, she needs to send me the bike
Yeah. So in Condon, they're working on, and this is a chamber-driven process, that they're using some of the waste management funds to do bike racks that also double as art installations. So they look, when they're not being used, like art on Main Street and other places. And that may be something that if Condon's successful in doing those, then maybe that's just a matter of getting the two chambers to talk about projects that they're doing and seeing if maybe Arlington wants to consider, putting fish down by the river or so, I mean, they're very creative, these artists, and I would love for people to be coming to Gilliam County as they're coming through and documenting on Instagram all of our cool bike racks as they go through and, having it kind of be a thing that people do. And then we also, Rachel and I had talked about, there's an empty wall at the county library that they originally were looking at doing murals, and I think they just didn't, that never gained traction. But there's Trouble Oregon worked with a nonprofit out of Portland that did some really cool murals that this might be something that we would set Rachel loose on and try to find resources for it.
And just a reminder that all of those are in the historic district and they have to go through the historic district planning. So.
Yeah, that's a good one to
Just a reminder. Because the side of Murray's would be awesome too, and the lovely part where as we'd like to call it, the Thompson Building, for when Dale was mayor.
Yeah.
It was torn down.
Yeah.
That building there with soil and water conservation. There's a few spots that murals would be really cool.
It's
Yeah.
really cool. So,
The Dallas is coming.
Yeah.
yeah, so we may need to figure out and have Rachel kind of working with the city and with the entities that own the buildings to see if there's an interest in bringing together partners. And I would really see that less of a court-driven thing and more of this is maybe an appropriate use of our community development office to be working on. And then my big passion project is downtown revitalization in Arlington. That is going to be beyond a one-year project. But I think it may be worth, one of the steps that we may be able to do is explore this program that U of O does. AOC had them at their conference this year. And the idea is it's for communities that have a tough problem they're trying to solve.
Like Arlington?
Like Arlington's downtown, I really thought. And what they do is when you contract with them, so it's a paid, they're not doing it for free, but the sponsoring entity contracts with them. They then, depending on what the problem is, go into the different colleges that may be applicable. So if you need architects or something, then they would bring in those different schools, and then they develop an approach to coming up with solutions. They actually are not implementing it, but and one of the things that, I think that they did some work down around Eugene and Springfield, but one of the things that they said was beneficial is that because it's coming from an outside person trying to solve it, if folks kind of get sort of stuck back in their positions sometimes, it can be hard to find common ground, and they found that when it's college students working on it, that people tend to be maybe a little bit more open and receptive to kind of out-of-the-box thinking. So it might be worthwhile, just as a first step, to even just see if that program might be a fit, potentially. And then from there, start a discussion with the city to see if there's interest on there, because their council would need, obviously, to have buy-in that this is something they want to do, and their business owners as well. So, but I'm just thinking, it's without fail, probably the number one thing that I hear when I'm in Arlington, that they say, boy, I really wish our downtown, had more available, was just a better representation of what the community here is. And I feel like this is an area that maybe we could provide some leadership in, at least bringing parties together and resources together to see if there's a path toward it.
It could definitely use some.
Okay. May I add a comment to that?
Sure.
Listening to that, there's a natural connection there too, and that's the School of Architecture at U of O. And extending that a little bit further, two commissioners might be able to help with plugging that into the city, and that I think the internship could look at perhaps offering up or conjuring up some redesigns of the mall approach and tying that directly to the objective of redoing the VI and all of that.
My mother-in-law, she was on the city council. She was for a long time. And during the course of time that I worked down there, she always wanted to do have maybe cobblestone street between, the two freeway exits, just right along Beach Street or whatever it is, right there by the park, and then make traffic go through and have to loop around and have that be more pedestrian friendly down there. And she never really got anywhere with the rest of the council at that time.
Yeah,
A lot of people have changed since then, but.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would raise my hand and say that I would look into the U of O program and just see if they would potentially take us on and what that cost commitment would look like. Again, you're paying for their time because they're basically designing classes and class projects around your project. So they're shipping kids out to help and all that kind of stuff. But I thought what was neat about that is that, it's students who are, one, I think it's always good when you can bring students from the Valley out here and engage with what life in rural America looks like. But the other thing is I thought they may be able to approach a potential solution in more creative ways than maybe us sitting here within the county who've just sort of heard the arguments over and over and maybe could use some fresh perspective on some possible.
So they look at the whole, we look at it with history, we know why things are there, and they look at it with the future instead of what it could be and not what it was.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I was going to say some of the projects that they did previously were for towns that had mills and things closing previously, where there was a lot of community identity wrapped up in something, and very maybe a painful conversation for the community to have, and the students could kind of break the barrier and talk about its future.
Emotion.
So there's a couple of things that have come out. One, Rachel might be asked to look further into the possibility of murals, and understanding that this is a historic district and there may be restrictions around that. And Liz will take the lead on reaching out to U of O to take at least a first assessment of whether this program might be suitable for Arnold.
That would be great.
We are now at the questions, and this is like Jeopardy or something, the questions and comment comes up again. So any final questions or comments concerning recreation and tourism, education, or community image?
I don't think so.
We are now 50 minutes ahead of schedule.
That's good because I have to move forward.
So-
A babysitter is like on our
Great. So areas where the court felt that they might want to conduct some additional research. So I don't want to act like research is just, like the spirit was, we just need to research everything to death. That I think these were things that the court felt research that could lead directly to some kind of important or substantive action. So that was court staffing, county services, and then the court granting programs. Let's start with court staffing. So the idea here was, and it came from a couple different places, review county court staffing to create efficiencies and ensure adequate support for the court meeting its agreed strategic goals. And I think they say the urgent is the enemy of the important sometimes in life. And so the spirit behind it, I think, in part, was that the daily job of running the court and taking on its everyday responsibilities can subsume the more, not necessarily important, but the very sometimes separate strategic goals that the court is also trying to undertake and further. So with that in mind, develop a strategic plan that informs staffing needs and structures. So with court staffing, there was the sense that, yes, a larger strategic plan may be needed, but there was also the idea that the court might want to step up and put together a staffing realignment proposal for the Budget Committee's consideration to really assess, and I don't know how long it's been since the court actually took a look at its staffing and structure to see if it's still appropriate and works well. That was put on the table. And then look at services that can be shared through partnerships with surrounding counties and local cities. That's a very separate thing. And maybe that should have gone under county services. Maybe it should have, so maybe I screwed that up a little bit. But still, those three things were put on the table, and what do you think in terms of next 9 months to a year, realizing you've already got quite a bit on your plate? But we only have a couple more things to talk about, so what do you think?
I mean, my intention actually is to put forward a staffing realignment proposal. There's some, I think if you look historically, there's been a lot of our staff have their sort of main job, and then they've been tasked with, it just appears that whatever period in time there was a need that came up, they just sort of saw who had maybe some hours available and moved it into there. And so there's some folks that have some positions that are kind of, they may have sort of a main thing, but they've sort of had things tagged on. And so part of the realignment would look at how can we better define those roles, and if needed, add staffing to help sort of make it a little bit more clear or efficient in terms of who's handling.
Because I know there are like 3 different people that are each have a piece of one, what to me is one job description, and this person's doing this, and this person's doing their job and this little piece of that, and then over here somebody else has a piece of it. And to me, we need to realign get those.
So Liz, what kind of support or what kind of support, or who else would you potentially need on your team to put together that realignment proposal?
I think I've got it.
Okay.
I think I'll have something to be able to share with the Budget Committee. So I'll raise my hand and take that on. Chris?
Boy, your hand is...
So whatever happened to this whole, was it LGIP or LGPI? I can't remember which one it is. Anyhow, all of that stuff that we went through, a year ago? I mean, we sat down and took 2 or 3 hours for us to fill out all these questionnaires for this, to do all these job analysis and all this job studies and job descriptions, stuff like that. Where did that go, and where's that? I mean, wouldn't that already kind of help you in this process? If it was done? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely people's job descriptions were created. My sense, and maybe because you were in the courthouse at the time, I'm not sure that a lot of the employees felt like the end result was an accurate representation of the jobs that they're doing, and that there was some significant pushback about whether those were accurate. And so I guess what I'm looking at is maybe 2 separate things, which is one, making sure that the staffing footprint is appropriate for what we're trying to get done here in the building. So that's sort of one thing. But then once we kind of determine what that footprint looks like, then making sure, to Chris's point, that the job descriptions fit, that we don't, and so I do have the job descriptions that they created, and the next step from LGPI would have been to have everybody sign those. But my sense is that the employees haven't fully bought into that. And so I personally felt that it was maybe something that we would need to look at tweaking a little bit to make sure that that the employees were bought into that and felt that that was an accurate representation of what they're doing.
I agree. I never saw the end result, so I wasn't sure what had ever happened with any of it, so.
Never got finalized.
One indirect
They were approved by the
result
board.
was LGPI
We
was
just never went
dissolved
anywhere
into
after that.
LLC.
They were approved, they are
They
official.
ran out of money from
It's signed by
LLC.
the employees. Or the court.
Or the court.
Can you enlighten me what LGPI stands for?
Local Government
Personnel Institute.
Which is no longer.
Yeah, they're defunct now.
Oh, they are,
I think,
really?
But they were a contractor that helped the previous court.
Still
Okay,
has
They
some.
still exist, don't they? They're down to like 2 people, but they still exist.
I thought they got taken in by LLC or
They're
Yeah, they
under
were-
Oh, did they?
LLC, but do they
Oh.
still have?
They still have 2 people that are technically LGPI.
They have quite a staff now, courtesy of LLC, legal organizations.
Not making the
All right.
other side very happy. if you
Very
listen
good.
to LLC.
Moving right along, county services, some of this I'm sure will be controversial and would need to be more strategically looked at, but there's just conduct strategic planning, review services provided by the county, explore combining the north and south service districts, work to ensure service district viability as the wind energy SIP revenues sunset. So I'm not sure which of these would not fall into a longer-term strategic planning frame, but are there things that you might want to take first steps toward in the next 9 months to a year?
I would say on the strategic planning, I think we could definitely go through the process of identifying a facilitator for that and setting up kind of a schedule for doing that longer term process, when that's in place, you know, all of those kinds of things. So I think we can, I would hope in 9 months from now, be able to have a strategic plan done for like a 5-year kind of plan.
Well, we have a good base to go off of. That was
And this is kind
2
of a
years,
starting point.
worked on for 2 years and then,
Yeah. And this too, I think, is a good sort of
Yes.
foundational kind of thing. So that piece, I think we could definitely kind of take on.
Great. Anything else in the county services realm that would fall into a more immediate frame versus a longer-term strategic frame?
Are you guys thinking about facilities plans? Road plans? I mean, I'm sure Dewey has ideas of what he's got going, but just for budget purposes, like, I'm gonna use the facilities of the courthouse. I heard they were thinking about putting a roof on, you know? I heard they were thinking about replacing the windows, of having a schedule of when all these are gonna happen, and so you can plan for it. And I keep coming back to, because after I've gone to Sherman County's courthouse, it would be great to start a plan of doing something like what Sherman County did, to plan down the road in 10 years, save some money each. But I mean, it seems like everything's always a last minute. I'm not talking about the roads, Dewey. But I'm talking about.
I have a plan.
Yeah.
It's written right there.
It's all right
It's
here.
printed, I do it every year.
Yeah, exactly. But what I'm saying is like, it seems like, I mean, and we have some of that too, is with your buildings of, you know, we need to redo the floors. And are you guys thinking about plans like that? Road, facilities? I mean, and this would also include all your facilities, such as the industrial park, which Dewey was talking about
Fairgrounds.
getting a plant, the fairgrounds. The
Yeah, I
actual
actually
courthouse.
had this discussion with Nathan this morning while we were going over budget worksheets, was in the capital line item budget, maybe moving some money in and creating a facilities line that we can start scrolling, at least start squirreling away some money, but with the eye toward having somebody help us develop a plan and then having money available to start taking projects one at a time. So it was, I mean, this will be news to these two, but I was anticipating that we would probably, I would at least start raising it during the budget committee about starting to move more funds into the capital improvements line item and having some money at least set aside in there as a placeholder. So I would say that is maybe a first step potentially, although I wouldn't want to get out in front of the budget committee, but at least something that we could look at is putting some money into that, and actually having a facility plan developed that looks at the long-term needs. And court security, I mean, this is a huge, everybody should go see Sherman County's courthouse, and then it'll question the court security in here as soon as you see what they've set up, because they really were thoughtful about how to do that, and hopefully nothing like that ever happens here, but I just thought it's interesting to see somebody else's new courthouse and how that looks, and to start thinking about what we could do here, I think is beneficial, so.
And I think it could be a lot like our water sewer master plans. We have it prioritized. The engineers, you have an architect that does it, the engineer, you have priority 1's probably the roof, priority 2 might be the windows, priority 10 might be an addition
Yeah.
to do that. But at least you have what the costs are at this time, and have someone actually draw up the plan
Yeah.
is probably going to be well worth the money.
One thing I've been thinking about too is, but along with that is this parking lot out here. Is we got a lot of people, you know, and part of it is there's not good drainage there, so just looking at, you know, is there a way to make it so that it's draining as it's melting, because the road crew is pushing it off, and it's great, but then it melts and it all comes and sits and becomes an ice skating rink again, so it's kind of, you know, it was like, short of having covered parking, what can we do? And it seems like maybe drainage or something might be helpful to reduce.
It becomes a maintenance issue, the
Yeah.
drainage. Another thing that for facilities is you have an industrial park. You have roads in the industrial park that need, you know, that's something that needs to be figured in. I was going to bring up a budget time.
We have a building that's repaired.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's not a
Well, we have a large building that needs repaired,
Yeah.
not the,
Not the.
Derelict.
The streets,
beautiful
the
derelict.
$6 million
yeah,
derelict.
the streets down there need to be maintained also.
It's sort of a humorous note here, Commissioner Wilkins, but I think they ought to take the grain lab and move it over east of the road on the bluff somewhat, and then they could lease it because they'd get a cell signal.
They have high-speed internet going around.
I was gonna say, there's a junction box right there for the high-speed internet, so
Not the gut.
can't get service.
I have a quick question. The Explorer combining the north and south service districts, what exactly are we?
What service
Considering.
districts were we talking about?
Yeah, that's my question.
Fire,
All of them.
all, fire, health.
List them all for me real quick.
Yeah, health districts, fire districts, cemetery
School
districts,
districts.
school districts.
I think that's it.
I feel like there's one more.
The port, but it's already,
Port's already,
Port's already-
already done it.
Carrying away.
It's probably the big ones.
I'm talking out of order again. I didn't realize you were talking about, I thought there were a couple of specifics, but man, that brings up what we talked about momentarily during recess of, you know, if I had it my way, quote unquote, of what the health district should be, there should be a unified countywide health district. But talking about setting that as a goal that you're looking at trying to get into this next year, I'm not so sure.
No, that's a long-term goal, yeah.
So what, is that what you're looking at? That's why it's listed there as something other than after?
Well, I think when we each had conversations with Lindsay, I think we just sort of
Right.
we were free, kind
Right.
of
Free thinking.
free thinking,
Right.
and then some of these obviously would not be realistic to consider in a year. Some of them, the strategic planning, I think we can get that done in a year. The others, I'm not sure.
But it says explore, which means,
Yeah.
Right.
so with the feelers out, well,
Right.
how does that look? How does it happen? Or is the
Yeah, a lot of-
people for that, not just, we're gonna do it?
Yeah, just to say.
What
in
would
the-
happen if we put that out?
Yeah, just to say that in the context of the interviews, I asked for general feedback, ideas, brainstorm, what might be something worth thinking about. So these were not put forward as things that anyone necessarily said, we absolutely should do it, but everything was allowed to be put on the table. So that was something that was put on the table.
Do you have a comment?
So just a question, since it's up there and you're exploring. So what is the process to do that when you have those boards as elected positions?
That's a good question.
My sense is that they would both have to vote to combine.
So, meaning, okay, so it's not the community members, the county member, people that go to the, and go and vote to make it countywide, or does it?
That's kind of how.
That's a good question.
That's how
Okay.
this being
Just a
is.
question.
Yeah.
Say, how did the board do countywide?
It starts, as I would understand it, Judge, it started at the board levels, they'd have to
That was
initiate
probably, you weren't in the
doing
board.
that,
I wasn't
and then it
in
gets
it,
put on the ballot, essentially.
Seems like we voted on
Kind
Yeah,
of comes
just-
down.
I'm
So,
just kinda
so the
curious.
port was a different deal because that was just one district expanding.
Yeah.
Okay.
This would actually require the boards of both districts to agree to combine.
Yeah.
And there's a lot
They
in
would,
that.
they would have to agree to combine, and then it would have to be put to a vote of the.
Right.
Of the people, probably.
And then
People, yeah.
re-jurisdictioned then, or do you, like
Well,
the
there
board
wouldn't be,
is?
there wouldn't
or-
be a jurisdiction then.
Well,
There wouldn't be, well, that's what.
It would be
depends on
countywide.
Well,
Jurisdiction.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you would
It'd be
want your
zoned,
board to
zoned
be
like the road
representative.
commission.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't,
Yeah, I just was curious how it would work.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's why it says explore.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
Does that save the county money? Does that save, by combining some of these things and services and
It balance,
employees?
it would
and-
balance, is what it would do.
Well, and it might also, I mean, aside from just looking at the money side, in terms of services provided, it creates an efficiency, right? So you're not doubling everything
Right.
that you're doing, and so then your administrative costs would likely go down for both districts, because you're combining that into one, and then that leaves more money available for other things, but.
Better support for both ends. Countywide, I should say.
But I think that's a long-term
Yeah, that is a long
discussion.
Maybe
Well,
in my tenure, that would be one of my goals before I'm done.
You get it done, Sharon. You're doing good.
Would you
All right.
support me?
I will. Yes, I
Would you?
will.
So-
Okay, that's all, that's done then. You're behind me, buddy. We're done.
We're on our last topic.
So real quick before we move on to this, so just as a suggestion for you guys to consider, talking about county services, talking about budgeting, talking about the SIP agreement sunsetting, you may want to think about putting money aside for county services operations in the future, because as those SIPs go away, we're also going to start struggling to cover the expenses of staff. We're not struggling, but it'll be much more difficult than it is now.
There's about, I think, $500,000 that we transfer to Rowan County government out of the SIPs right now. So that would be a budget
Right.
hole, potentially.
All right. So the county granting programs, the topic came up. Sandy was very responsive. I just asked for some background information. And my understanding, without casting any judgment or anything else, is that there has been an increased interest in structuring the granting process more formally. There's been an interest in clarifying granting criteria, and also some interest in increasing the accountability and reporting of outcomes on the back end of the granting process. And I also got the impression that some of this is already happening. So, but it came up, and I wanted to be sure that it was put on the docket. So, not sure where it
We're
stands.
almost done with that.
In terms
Almost
of-
done?
Yeah. In terms of sort of next steps, I would say, the big things are going to be the reporting and sort of accountability piece of it, kind of the year end when folks are coming back to us. But the other thing I think that we'll probably just want to sort of flag as something we need to do is, once we get through this first sort of round, is revisiting those original decisions and making sure that, you know, there's
Well, we need
nothing
to
that
look
needs
at
to be clarified or.
We need to look at the grants and see how the questions were answered and where the issues were and what people felt were.
Yeah, so there's still a refinement, I
Yeah.
guess, that will need to happen of those guardrails that we
The
put in
application
place.
process.
Yeah. So, and I would anticipate that that will be an ongoing thing for several years, that until we really get one that we feel.
Well, I think one of the big issues was the timing.
Yeah.
But that was because of the budget process. So next year, that timing will be.
Folks will be prepared
Yes,
to
it'll
know
be a
that
lot.
it's coming. Yeah, better.
Yeah.
So who's spearheading the ongoing refinement of the guardrails, so to speak?
So I think all three of us will. It's really, I'll sort of flag it as, it would be my role to make sure it gets on the agenda, but all three of us to really,
Find out.
yeah, to solicit feedback from the applicants and see what worked well, what didn't, what needs more. I mean, it's little things like folks have asked if we're going to put a value on, we are going to set what the value is for volunteers, for instance, those kinds of things, for in-kind contributions, just little things that we didn't
That's an interesting
tackle
question.
when we went through, but that Kelly's just kind of fielding now and doing the best that she can, but that meaning official court guidance next year, kind of thing. So those kinds of things. And I think Kelly is sort of noting those too, as things come up when she's dealing with applicants' questions, that she's been, I think, kind of keeping a list of these are some questions that may need clarification, so.
And sorry, what is Kelly's role?
Kelly is the deputy treasurer.
Great.
And she's the point person on the grants.
Perfect. All right, so we now have, yes, questions and comments around court staffing, county services, or county granting programs. Last opportunity to weigh in on these. Okay, we're now at wrap up and next steps. So just to say my next steps, and I will be working with Sandy on this because we've both been taking our notes. I have been tasked with putting together basically a summary of the action steps and goals that the court has thought about today, and I will be working with Sandy to get that document put together as quickly as possible, which should definitely not be any longer than a couple of weeks, but I think probably a week or so. End of next week, let's just say.
Great.
You're not heading to the Bahamas, are you?
Not anymore.
Okay, all right. So
Patience,
now that I've wrecked Sandy's.
Canceled.
Yeah, my wife and I went down to Tucson to get away from the snow, and we got into a blizzard in Tucson.
How'd that
So
work
we're
out for
like,
you?
we give up, you know. So, and I am a continuing resource, such as I am, beyond this, at no additional fee, to help in any way that I can to ensure that the document that we put forward is useful and clear, and also if there's anything else that I can do, as I said, I'm not talking about any extra charge at all, to clarify or facilitate further discussion of the document that we submit. I'm more than happy to do that, so please let me know. Any other thoughts, considerations? All right, well, we're an hour and 15 minutes early,
Perfect.
and Sherry, thank you.
Sure, rushing out. Well,
My helper turned into a pumpkin.
We'll adjourn
so-
the work session, and then next Wednesday, we'll have another work session on juvenile court in the morning, and then the regular court meeting will start at 11.
So 9,
9 for the.
11, and
9 for the work session,
Executive
11.
session.
No, we're not gonna have an
Oh,
executive
we're not,
session.
okay.
We'll just go right into court
Okay.
at 11.
Okay.
And then we do have the lead assessment that has a firm.
Oh, and that's in
time,
Arlington.
And that's at 1:05, so that will probably be last on our agenda.
Okay.
And then as soon as that wraps up, we'll close the meeting.
Are we gonna order in?
We can if you want. We have it, we
You're
have
in
fees
charge.
to decide.
You know,
Okay.
You're in charge of ordering.
Most important question.
Work session
get
is
one?
adjourned.
All right.